Have you ever wondered how the British monarchy acquired its vast wealth and power? The answer lies in a dark chapter of history that's often overlooked, a chapter steeped in exploitation and violence. The British monarchy's relationship with the transatlantic slave trade is not a simple footnote in history, but a foundational element. The first Queen Elizabeth wasn't just a passive observer of the burgeoning slave trade, she was an active participant. Historical records reveal that she funded slave voyages, setting a precedent for royal involvement in this inhumane business. This wasn't a side hustle for the monarchy, but a major source of wealth and power. But the monarchy's involvement in the slave trade wasn't solely about individual royals. It was also about the institutions they created and supported, like the Royal African Company. This entity was responsible for the forced migration of over 187,000 Africans, a staggering number that underscores the scale of the monarchy's direct involvement in the slave trade. The wealth generated from this trade didn't just fill the royal coffers, it also fueled Britain's industrial revolution. The prosperity that catapulted Britain onto the global stage was built on the backs of enslaved Africans. Cities like Bristol and Liverpool, now bustling metropolises, owe their rise to the wealth generated by the slave trade. It's a stark reminder that the grandeur and opulence associated with the British monarchy, symbolized by the crown, were not born out of benign achievements. Instead, they were forged in the crucible of human suffering and exploitation. In the grand narrative of the British monarchy, this is a truth that's often glossed over, but it's a truth that demands our attention. The crown, a symbol of power and nobility, also serves as a stark reminder of a legacy of exploitation and violence. The gleam of the crown is not just the reflection of gold and jewels, but also the glossing over of a dark past. Thus, the crown, which symbolizes power, also masks a legacy of exploitation and violence. But how much of this history do you think is taught in Britain's schools? The answer, quite sadly, is not nearly enough. In the classrooms of Britain, the brutal realities of colonization are often swept under the rug, replaced by a sanitized version of history that paints their empire as a benevolent force. This is not to say that the British Empire didn't contribute to the development of many regions. It did, but this should not be allowed to overshadow the widespread exploitation and violence that underpinned its expansion. This lack of education, this absence of truth, fuels a deep-rooted denialism within British society. It's a phenomenon that sees many cling to the comforting myth of a benign empire, one that brought civilization and progress to backward nations. But history is not a buffet where one can pick and choose the parts they like. It's a full-course meal that must be consumed in its entirety, the sweet with the sour. The brutal facts are these. The British Empire was built on the backs of enslaved Africans. It thrived on stolen wealth. The royals, including figures like Queen Elizabeth I, were deeply entwined with the slave trade. Cities like Bristol and Liverpool burgeoned not just because of trade and industrial innovation, but also because of the profits from human suffering. This denialism, this refusal to confront the uncomfortable truths of the past, is a stain on the collective conscience of Britain. It's a disservice to the millions who suffered under the yoke of colonial exploitation. It's a barrier to understanding the present, to addressing the enduring legacies of slavery and colonization that still shape our world. How can Britain reconcile with its past if it refuses to acknowledge the full extent of its actions? How can it make amends if it continues to hide behind the veil of benevolent empire? These are questions that demand answers, that call for an honest examination of history. This denialism, however, cannot erase the undeniable truth. What if we told you that there are documents that expose the royals' direct involvement in the slave trade? It might sound like a plot out of a historical thriller, but it's a chilling reality. These documents, hidden away in dusty archives and quiet libraries, are testament to a truth many have tried to bury. They reveal transactions between the British monarchy and slave traders, painting a picture of a crown tarnished by the blood and tears of the enslaved. The wealth generated from slavery wasn't just used to line the coffers of the royal family, it was the lifeblood of the British Empire's expansion. Imagine, if you will, an intricate web, with the monarchy at its center, spinning threads of exploitation that reached every corner of the globe. From Africa to the Americas, from Asia to the Pacific Islands, the wealth squeezed out of human suffering was used to tighten the British Empire's grip. Lands were conquered, cultures were suppressed, and indigenous peoples were displaced, all in the name of power and wealth. This was not a random act of greed, but a carefully planned and executed strategy. The royals didn't merely turn a blind eye to slavery. They were architects of a system that commodified human beings, treating them as mere assets to be bought, sold, and discarded at will. The legacy of this exploitation is a world map scarred by the lines of colonial borders, societies fractured by the aftershocks of cultural suppression, and communities still struggling under the weight of economic and social disparities. The tentacles of this systemic exploitation, originating from the heart of the British monarchy, continue to strangle progress and equality even today. And so we find ourselves at the crossroads of history and morality. The documents stand as undeniable proof, a mirror reflecting the horrors of the past. They expose the royal family's direct and deliberate participation in the slave trade, shattering the myth of a benevolent empire. This exploitation was not just a phase, but a calculated and sustained strategy. It's a truth that challenges us to question, to learn, and to seek justice for the wounds that are yet to heal. But what does this history of exploitation mean for the present day, you may ask, as we delve into the echoes of the past? This isn't a question of mere historical interest. It's a matter of justice, of righting wrongs that reverberate through generations. The legacy of slavery and colonization isn't a relic of the past. It's a living, breathing reality for millions of people today. The descendants of the colonized and enslaved carry the weight of this history. It's etched in their collective memory, woven into their cultural fabric, and imprinted on their socio-economic realities. In the face of this enduring injustice, they demand reparations, and rightly so. Reparations aren't about monetary compensation alone. They represent a moral imperative, a call for acknowledgement, atonement, and a commitment to righting historical wrongs. A call for justice that reverberates through the halls of power, from the streets of Bristol and Liverpool to the gilded halls of Buckingham Palace. This isn't a fringe movement. It's a global chorus of voices demanding justice, from Caribbean nations seeking reparations from their former colonial masters, to African Americans in the United States, calling for restitution for centuries of slavery and discrimination. Their demands echo across continents and oceans, a testament to the shared struggle against the dark legacy of slavery. Yet, despite the growing clamor, the response has been woefully inadequate. Many continue to downplay the atrocities of the past, or worse, deny them altogether. They cling to myths of a benevolent empire, ignoring the blood-soaked truth of history. But these demands for justice cannot be silenced. They are grounded in a simple yet powerful truth, that to heal the wounds of the past, we must first acknowledge them, that to build a more just future, we must confront the injustices of our history. The British monarchy, the nation itself, and indeed all nations tainted by the legacy of slavery, must heed this call. They must engage in sincere dialogue about reparations, offer heartfelt apologies, and commit to concrete actions that address the impacts of this painful history. Their voices, echoing from centuries past, cannot be ignored. So where does the British monarchy stand today in light of this history? In the face of this daunting history, King Charles III has spoken of a vision for a modern monarchy. But what does this modernity truly mean? Is it merely a superficial sprucing up of the old institution, or does it entail a deep transformative cleaning of the tarnished crown? To truly modernize, the monarchy must confront its past. A past steeped in the brutalities of colonization, slavery, and exploitation. This is not just about acknowledging these historical facts in speeches or statements. It is about embracing the uncomfortable truths, about opening the royal archives to scrutiny, about allowing the hidden history to be unveiled in all its stark reality. A sincere apology is long overdue. An apology that is not just words but a heartfelt recognition of the suffering caused, the lives lost, the cultures destroyed. An apology that resonates with the descendants of those who were enslaved and colonized. An apology that acknowledges the blood money that built the empire. But an apology alone is not enough. The path to redemption involves reparations. These conversations may be difficult, they may challenge the status quo, but they are necessary. This is not about doling out charity, but about addressing historical injustices, about rectifying the economic imbalance created by centuries of exploitation. And the reparations should not just be monetary, they should involve educational reforms that teach the true history of the empire, that challenge the myth of the benevolent colonizer. They should involve cultural exchanges that celebrate the diversity of the Commonwealth, that honor the contributions of those who were enslaved and colonized. Only then can the crown begin to shine without the shadow of blood money. It's time to learn more about this issue and support reparations, because acknowledging the past is the first step towards a more equitable future.